Thomas Wade was 39 years old, a structural engineer who built things designed to carry weight, and who had learned everything he knew about carrying weight from watching his mother do it first. He drove a truck with a dent in the passenger door he had always meant to fix. He kept a photograph in his wallet, not his wife's, not a vacation, just a photograph of his mother on the day she retired. Standing outside a building with her name on a plaque beside the entrance, smiling the specific smile of a woman who had finished something hard and was not done yet. On a Sunday evening in February, his wife Renee sat across from his mother at a dinner table, looked at the quiet, plain-dressed woman who had raised Thomas alone from the time he was 6 years old, and said, in the tone of someone making an observation rather than a judgment, that she did not understand how some people could spend a whole life doing so little with it. She was not speaking to his mother. She was speaking about her. To the table. His mother said nothing. She set her fork down. She looked at her hands. What happened next would cost Renee everything she thought she'd secured. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The dining room smelled like the food Thomas's mother had made that afternoon. Collard greens and roasted chicken and a sweet potato dish she brought every time she came. The same dishes she had made on every significant occasion of his life, cooked in her small kitchen with the same cast-iron pot she had owned for 30 years. She had driven 40 minutes to be there. She had arrived at 4 o'clock with 2 grocery bags and the specific energy of a woman who shows love through feeding people and who had never once asked for recognition for it. Thomas had watched his mother cook in that kitchen every Sunday of his childhood. He had sat on the counter as a small boy and watched her hands move over the stove with the efficiency of someone who does not measure anything, because she has made these dishes enough times that the amounts live in her fingers. She had told him once, when he asked her how she knew when something was done, "You learn to trust what you've been shown." He had written that down in his notebook. He still had the notebook. It was in a box in the study, with other things his mother had said that he had learned to keep. Genevieve Wade was 68 years old. She had spent 31 years as a federal magistrate judge in the Northern District of Georgia, appointed first at 37, reappointed through 4 administrations, known in the federal court system for opinions that were cited in higher court decisions with a regularity that younger clerks studied as a matter of professional education. She had published 2 books on procedural equity that were used in 3 law school curricula. She had a lecture hall named after her at her alma mater, Spelman College. She had a plaque beside the entrance of the federal courthouse, where she had served for 2 decades, that read, "The Honorable Genevieve Wade in service to justice." She did not wear this in her face. She did not arrive at her son's dinner table radiating credentials. She arrived with grocery bags. She wore a plain cardigan. She asked about the garden and the neighborhood, and whether Thomas had gotten the bathroom faucet looked at the way he had been meaning to do. She was, to anyone who saw only the surface, a quiet older woman who had raised a son alone. Renee had seen only the surface. She had seen it for 3 years, the 3 years she had been married to Thomas, and had decided, from that surface, what the woman was worth. Thomas had known all 3 years that Renee and his mother were not close. He had attributed this to difference in energy, in personality, in the gap between his mother's particular quietude and Renee's preference for social visibility. He had told himself it was friction, not hostility. He had extended good faith past the evidence, the way he always did. Because his mother had never complained, and because he loved them both, and because some distances feel bridgeable until they are suddenly, irreversibly not. The Sunday dinner had been his idea. He had wanted them in the same room more than once a year. He had wanted Renee to know his mother the way he knew his mother, through time and attention and the slow accumulation of understanding that comes from sitting with someone long enough to hear what they actually have to say. He had not anticipated what Renee would say first. The moment arrived quietly. His mother had been speaking, carefully, simply, about a neighborhood she had visited recently, a community initiative involving a youth legal education program she had been advising. She had not said she was advising it. She had said she had been spending some time there, talking to the young people. Renee had been on her second glass of wine. She had been intermittently on her phone beneath the table, in the way she sometimes was at dinners that did not hold her interest. She had looked up at the point where Thomas's mother was describing one of the young people, a 16-year-old girl who had asked an unexpectedly precise question about due process. Renee had looked at Thomas's mother. She had looked at the cardigan and the neat gray hair, and the hands folded now beside the plate. She had looked at the way his mother described the experience, not as achievement, just as time spent, just as the ordinary texture of her days. And she had said it. Not loudly. Conversationally, turned slightly toward Thomas, as though his mother were not present, or as though her presence were not sufficient to require discretion. She said she had never understood people who spent their whole lives in the background, who just moved through things quietly and never really built anything or left anything behind. She said there was something almost sad about it. She said she hoped she never became that. She picked up her glass. Thomas's mother set her fork down. She looked at her hands for a moment. Then she looked at Thomas. He was looking back at her. He had gone very still in the way he went still when something required him to decide what kind of man to be in the next 30 seconds. His mother gave him the smallest shake of her head, not to stop him, to tell him she was all right, that she had been all right before he was born, and she would be all right after the dinner was over, and this was not a situation that required his intervention. He looked at his wife. Renee was refilling her glass. She had not noticed his mother's expression or his own. She was turning back to the table with the mild, self-satisfied quality of someone who has said something honest and is waiting for the conversation to resume. Thomas set his own fork down. He picked up his water glass. He set it back down. He said, "Let's talk about something else." His voice was even. It contained nothing visible. Renee looked at him, read his face, found something there she didn't quite understand, and moved on to another subject. His mother ate the rest of her meal. She helped clear the plates afterward, the way she always did. She said goodbye at 8:30 with the same warmth she arrived with. The grocery bags gone, the cardigan on, the car keys in her hand. She held Thomas's face for a moment when she hugged him. She said, "You turned out right." He watched her car pull down the street. He went back inside. He had met Renee at a professional event 4 years ago. She was 36, worked in pharmaceutical marketing, was sharp and well-dressed, and had the quality of someone who understood how rooms worked and how to work them. He had liked her precision and her intelligence, and the way she asked questions that were actually questions, not performances. He had liked that she was building something. He had loved her. He still did, in the diminished way you love something after a fundamental injury, present, but no longer load-bearing. The year before that Sunday, he had noticed a pattern in how Renee spoke about people. She had a taxonomy: people who had built things and people who had not, people who had made visible marks and people who existed in the background. She applied this taxonomy with the consistency of someone who had been doing it long enough that it felt like discernment rather than limitation. She did not apply it cruelty. She applied it the way she applied most things, efficiently. without pausing long enough to consider whether the instrument was the right one for the measurement. He had heard her apply it to a colleague once, a woman who had worked quietly in the same department for 20 years and who had, in Renee's assessment, simply failed to distinguish herself. He had felt something then that he had not named. He had filed it away. He had not thought she would apply it to his mother. He understood now that the failure had been his. He had not told Renee who his mother was. He had not said, "The woman who is coming to dinner raised a son alone while serving on the federal bench for 31 years, and her name is on a building, and her opinions are in the casebooks, and she brought her groceries in a paper bag and asked about the bathroom faucet." He had assumed that proximity would produce understanding, that Renee would ask, that she would wonder. She had not wondered. That was the gap he had failed to close. And it had closed itself, on a Sunday evening, in the worst possible way. That was what he hadn't understood about the distance between them. Until now. Her name was Millicent Osai. She was 63 years old, a retired circuit court judge who had been Genevieve Wade's closest friend for 22 years. A woman with close-cropped silver hair and the particular quality of someone who had spent decades on the bench, learning to wait until she had heard everything before deciding anything. She had been at the Sunday dinner. She had been the fourth person at the table, a detail Renee had never fully registered, having treated Millicent as peripheral with the same efficiency she had applied to Genevieve. Millicent had sat across from Renee and heard everything. She had set her fork down at approximately the same time as Genevieve. She had looked at Thomas. She had held her counsel. She called Thomas on Monday morning at 7:18. "I didn't say anything last night," she said, "because your mother told me with her eyes not to." "I know," he said. "I need to tell you something she won't tell you herself," Millicent said. "And then I'm going to show you something." He drove to her house at 9. It was neat and warm, smelling of coffee and something she had been baking. She had a folder on the kitchen table and a printed document beside it, and a pot of coffee she had made before he arrived. She sat down. She did not offer pleasantries. "Last week," she said, "the Judicial Council of the 11th Circuit announced the renaming of a courtroom. The Wade Courtroom. Your mother was told about it privately 3 months ago. She hasn't said anything about it publicly. That's consistent with her." Millicent placed the document on the table, a printed copy of the Judicial Council announcement, dated, formal, the language of an institution conferring the highest recognition it knows how to give. In the announcement, they describe her as one of the most influential procedural jurists of the last 3 decades. Those are not words the 11th Circuit uses lightly. Thomas looked at the document. He did not speak for a moment. "She wasn't going to tell you," Millicent said. "She was going to let you find out the same way everyone else does. She doesn't announce herself." He set the document down. "There's more," Millicent said. She opened the folder. The first item was a printed email exchange, a law school dean at Emory writing to Genevieve, asking if she would deliver the commencement address in May. The second was a letter from the governor's office, dated 6 weeks ago, regarding a judicial advisory appointment. The third was a profile in a legal journal, not a small one, titled "The Quiet Architecture of Justice: The Legacy of Judge Genevieve Wade." He looked at each item. He set each one down beside the previous one, in order, on the table. He looked at the table. He thought about a cardigan and grocery bags, and a woman who asked about the bathroom faucet, about a daughter of the South who had raised a son alone and served the law for 31 years, and said nothing about any of it unless someone asked. He thought about Renee's voice at the dinner table, the wine glass, the mild, self-satisfied quality of someone who had said something she believed to be honest. He thought about his mother's face, her hands, the smallest shake of her head. He could see the whole shape of it now, not just the Sunday, the 3 years. The taxonomy Renee carried everywhere, applied indiscriminately, never once interrogated. The man she thought she had married, measured against the woman she had dismissed. The distance she had been building in her assessments of the people he came from. He looked at Millicent. "Does she know?" he said. His mother. He meant whether his mother knew what had been said while it was being said. She heard every word, Millicent said. She chose not to respond. "That is consistent with who she has always been." He nodded. He picked up his coffee. He held it. "What do you want to do?" Millicent said. He thought about that for a long moment. "I need to have a conversation," he said. "At home. Tonight, with Renee." "Yes, what kind of conversation?" He set the coffee down. "An honest one," he said. He didn't move fast. He drove home. He went to work. He answered his project calls and reviewed his drawings and gave his team what they needed from him, and did all of it with a steady, unhurried focus that was his professional signature. He did not call Renee during the day. He did not send a message. He let the hours do what hours do when you have decided to be honest about something and have not yet arrived at the moment. Renee was home by the time he got there. She had cooked, which was not common, and the apartment smelled of something she had made from a recipe she sometimes made when things were good between them. She had the quality of someone who did not know that the weather had changed. He sat down at the table. He waited while she poured water and brought the food, and sat across from him with the ease of an ordinary Tuesday. He said, "I need to talk to you about Sunday." She looked at him. She set down her fork with the expression of someone who had registered the tone and was already preparing her response. He told her what he had heard. Precisely, he repeated what she had said. The exact words, without interpretation, without addition. He told her where his mother had been sitting. He told her what his mother had done when she heard it. He told her what Millicent had told him that morning, and what the folder had contained, and what the judicial announcement said. He said it all, without raising his voice. Without accusation, he simply laid it in front of her the way he laid plans on a desk. The full picture, visible at once, available for honest assessment. Renee was quiet through all of it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment longer. "I didn't know," she said. "I know you didn't," he said. "If I had known, I need you to hear what I'm saying," he said, gently, firmly. "You didn't say what you said because you knew who she was and dismissed it. You said it because you looked at her and decided what she was worth before you knew anything about her." He paused. "That's the part I need you to sit with." She looked at the table. He looked at her. He thought about 3 years. About the woman he had loved. About the taxonomy she had carried without examining it. "You need to apologize to her," he said. "Not to me, to her." Renee looked up. "And it has to be real," he said. "Not because of the courtroom with her name on it. Not because of the law review profile. Because she is my mother, and she sat at my table, and she deserved better." He picked up his fork. He ate. He let the silence do what silence does when something true has been said, and the person who needed to hear it has heard it. Renee did not speak for a long time. Then she said, quietly, "You're right." He looked at her. "I'll call her tomorrow," she said. He nodded. He did not say anything else. There was nothing else required. Renee called Genevieve the next morning. Thomas did not know exactly what was said. He did not ask. He had said what he needed to say, and the conversation belonged to the two of them. His mother called him that evening. She said that Renee had called. She said the apology had been genuine. She said, and this was his mother, the woman who had spent 31 years on the bench reading people, that she believed it. He said, I'm glad. His mother said, she's going to have to work at it. He said, I know. She said, so are you. He said, I know that too. She said, come for dinner Sunday. I'll make the sweet potato dish. He said he would be there. He went back to the blueprints on his desk. He had a school renovation project that was entering its final structural review. He spread the drawings out and stood over them the way he stood over every set of plans, looking at all of it at once, finding where the lines connected, understanding the load. He had learned to read a structure from his mother, not the engineering. The other kind. The kind that told you where the weight was really being carried, and by whom, and whether the thing had been built to last. He had not always seen her clearly. He had loved her and taken her for granted in the way that children take for granted the things that have always been there. He had not told the people in his life who she was because it had seemed unnecessary. She was his mother. She was herself. She did not need to be announced. He understood now that the people around you cannot see what you have not shown them. That silence, even in the service of humility, leaves gaps, and gaps fill with whatever is available. He was not going to let that happen again. He picked up his pencil. He went back to the plans. It did not happen all at once. Renee and his mother built something slowly over the months that followed. Not warmth, exactly. Not at first. More like accuracy, a more accurate understanding, on Renee's part, of who the woman across from her actually was. Genevieve accepted it with the same patience she accepted everything. She asked questions instead of making assessments. She came for dinner twice more that year. At the second dinner, she brought the sweet potato dish and a book she had been reading that she thought Renee might like. A history of women in the law that she said was better than its title suggested. Renee had looked at it. She had said thank you. She had asked a question about one of the names in the introduction. His mother had smiled. The specific smile from the photograph in his wallet. Thomas watched this happen from across the table. He did not say anything. He ate his food and was grateful for the specific quality of a thing being repaired slowly and correctly. Millicent came by his office one afternoon with a plant, a small pothos that she said grew anywhere and asked for almost nothing. He put it on his windowsill. He watered it on Fridays. He had 3 projects in active structural review. A 4th was coming in after the new year. He answered every contractor call the same day. He gave accurate timelines and hit them. He still had the photograph in his wallet, the plaque beside the entrance, his mother's smile. He was going to get the dent in the truck door fixed. He had made an appointment. On a quiet Sunday in April, Thomas was at his mother's kitchen table, the same table he had grown up at. The morning light coming through the window over the sink the way it always had, the smell of coffee, and something in the oven that she had put in before he arrived. He had his mug. She had her tea. The morning was doing what Sunday mornings do when there is nowhere to be and nothing required. His mother was reading. She had a legal journal open on the table, not one of hers. One from a former clerk who had sent it because an article inside cited one of her opinions. She read without her glasses because she did not need them yet for large print. She read with the focused ease of someone who has been reading the law for 40 years and finds in it, still, things worth finding. He looked at her hands on the journal, the same hands that had moved over the stove for all of his childhood. The same hands that had signed 31 years of decisions, that had held him when he was small and let him go when it was time. that it set a fork down at a dinner table and said, "Without words, I am all right. You turned out right." He thought about the plaque beside the courthouse entrance, about the Wade courtroom, about a sweet potato dish and a paper grocery bag, and a woman who did not announce herself and who had, for 31 years, carried more than anyone in his life had known to acknowledge. He looked at her. She looked up from the journal. She saw him looking. She asked if he wanted more coffee. He said yes. She got up. She poured it. She sat back down. She went back to her reading. He drank his coffee. He looked out the window at the April morning, the yard coming green, the neighborhood quiet. He went back to work. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.